is it coming from? Oh, it's from the broadcast. We're about to start. Yeah. Well, we're about to start like now, so like, given that they've started recording, we may as well just. Yeah. Hi everyone. Thank you very much for attending the Imposter Syndrome and welcome on behalf of Wi-Fi and particularly Wi-Fi Advancement Pillar. My name's Anna Fry, still at work. My name's Anna Fry and I'm a retail finance business partner responsible for baby and EU programs. And this is Jimmy Mayer, who's a business partner within FinOps, focusing on hardlines.
Hello.
So, apologies, I know you've all started eating. Could everyone, and I said it would be interactive, can everyone stand up? If you're on live stream, you know, you can stand up, there's no pressure to. Sorry, guys. I'll give everyone like a few seconds to just finish eating as well. Okay, could you all close your eyes, please? I promise that I'm not going to like do anything weird. Right, can I actually see if anyone's got their own? Okay, cool.
Good.
So, just a few questions. Please, can you all remain standing if you sometimes compare your ability to those around you and think that they may be more intelligent than you are? Please remain standing if you tend to remember the incidents in which you have not done your best more than those times that you have done your best. Please, can you remain standing if you feel like your success has been due to some kind of luck? Okay, great. Everyone open your eyes? Cool. So I was actually expecting maybe one or two people to sit down. Feel free to sit down now, it's fine. So Jimmy and I are obviously still standing as well. So the statements that I've just made, those are all indicative of what imposter syndrome is. So it's a feeling in essence that you're just not really as good as others think you are, and at some point you're going to get rumbled and found out. So we're going to dig a little bit more into actually what this is in the following slides.
Okay, so Anna's given a very brief introduction to what imposter syndrome is, what it might feel like with some of the illustrations that you guys all stood up for. We're going to go with a bit more of a dictionary definition just to help hammer home a couple of key points. So I'm not going to read this in its entirety. Anna's already summarised it very nicely, but the two key things I would ask you to focus on would be the idea of this being a collection of feelings. There isn't a one-size-fits-all imposter syndrome. It's an umbrella term for certain feelings or thoughts you might have in different situations. Different people are going to have different thoughts at different times. As I say, it's not a one-size-fits-all issue. And another key thing, sorry, I don't quite know what's going on with the display. The other key thing to focus on is this idea of intellectual fraudulence, the idea that you're fibbing to people, that you're somehow convincing people that you are capable of things that you maybe doubt yourself on. Again, it sounds very strange, but I'd like to think, given the consensus of people that were standing up, it's probably more widespread than just you. It isn't just you that is feeling these things, however infrequently you feel them. The illustration I'd like to show that captures this is that this is dramatised a little bit, but do run with it. It's the idea that the proverbial board meeting. I've been in many an MBR with very senior, experienced people around the table who might suddenly ask you at any one point, what is the answer to this question that you are supposed to know? Now, that's pretty daunting, but at the same time, I feel that's a pretty Amazonian experience, frankly. There's no hiding from it. But we want to move people away from the experience of it being just me. Who's not to say that everybody else around that table isn't also feeling a similar feeling of inadequacy? So what we want to do is try and prove to people that it's actually far more balanced. So there is more overlap between what you know and what other people know. And even if the stuff that other people know, that's fine. There's other stuff that you know that they don't know. It's not this idea of it being exposed as a fraud who doesn't know anything or know what they're talking about. So just to come back more to the syndrome, as I say, this is something that's been studied academically, and one of the studies came out with the idea, it sounds rather high, but do run with it, that 70% of successful people have experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. Classic examples that you will have heard of include Albert Einstein, Sheryl Sandberg, and Meryl Streep. Google, there's a whole host of other people who've put their hands up and said, yep, this is how I felt at a certain point. These are all iconic names, very well regarded, very well respected. If little old you's feeling like that, the same as these guys, suddenly we're actually keeping pretty good company, right? And the first thing we want to do today, and again, we do really want this to be interactive, we'll come to that later, is the idea of holding your hands up and admitting and identifying the symptoms that you feel where you have or continue to feel imposter syndrome. So just a quick, I guess, reference on this one. So this isn't just an isolated phenomenon in its own right. This is part of what you might call, say, a spectrum. So there's an opposite to imposter syndrome, as strange as that might sound. That's what it's called. Are there any budding or amateur psychologists in the room who know what that is? No? Good. That would be a bit strange, but the idea is quite simple. So again, think opposite of what imposter syndrome is. It's the wild misalignment of one's ability and self-perceived ability, the idea that actually the less intelligent you are, the more intelligent you think you are. Again, I won't go into examples on that. Hopefully none of your colleagues are too much like that. And I don't think we're going to find a better example than a visitor to the UK recently. Again, if only we were all that intelligent, right? So just to say, that's kind of framing that this is a spectrum thing. I'd like to think most people from the standing and nearer the end of the spectrum that is considered more healthy, and most successful people have said that they have. We're now going to show you a clip from a brilliant TED Talk by a guy called Mike Cannon-Brooks, who you may not have heard of, but he talks about his experiences of imposter syndrome.
So I've experienced a lot of success in my life. Over a decade ago, I started a business with my mate, straight out of uni, with my mate Scott. Now, having no prior business experience and not really any grand plan, in fact, our goals when we started were not to have to get a real job and to not have to wear a suit to work every day. Check and check. Today, we have thousands of amazing employees. And millions of people use our software around the planet, and technically even outside the planet, if you count those that are currently on their way to Mars. So you'd think that I know what I'm doing every day when I go to work. Well, let me let you in on something. Most days, I still feel like I often don't know what I'm doing. I felt that way for 15 years, and I've since learned that feeling is called imposter syndrome. Have you ever felt out of your depth, like a fraud, and just kind of guessed/bullshitted your way through the situation, petrified that at any time someone was going to call you on it? Well, I can think of many examples where I felt like this. Interviewing our first HR manager, having never worked in a company that had an HR department. Terrified as I walked into the interview thinking, what am I going to ask this person? Or attending board meetings in a t-shirt, surrounded by suits, and acronyms are flying around, feeling like a 5-year-old as I surreptitiously write them down in my notebook so I can look them up on Wikipedia when I get home later. Or in the early days when people would call up and ask for accounts payable, I would freeze and think, wait, are they asking for money or giving it to us? And I would cover the phone, cover the mouthpiece of the phone, say, Scott, you're in accounts, and pass it across. We both did a lot of jobs back then. So for me, imposter syndrome is a feeling of being well out of your depth, yet already entrenched in the situation. Internally, you know you're not skilled enough, experienced enough, or qualified enough to justify being there, yet you are there. And you have to figure a way out because you can't just get out. It's not a fear of failure, and it's not a fear of being unable to do it. It's more a sensation of getting away with something, a fear of being discovered, that at any time someone is going to figure this out. And if they did figure it out, you'd honestly think, well, that's fair enough, actually. The writer, one of my favorite writers, Neil Gaiman, put it so beautifully in a commencement address he gave at a university called Make Good Art. And I want to...
Okay, just trying to... Okay, sorry, that looks like it's taken us back to a different position, but the illustration he was going to give was the artist he was quoting from. I haven't got it written down, so I can't really word for word like he was going to do, but the idea that at any moment, even as a successful artist, some guy was going to show up with a clipboard and a hat, shake his pen at the guy and say, sorry, game's up, we've rumbled you, go and get a real job, you're no longer this artist you've pretended you are all this time, show's over. This, as I say, is what this guy Mike Cannon-Brooks discussed in a bit more detail. We'll share this afterwards. Again, I'd really urge you, even with these clips, to watch it in its entirety. It's really, really enlightening, actually. And not that it matters, but I'm just going to give you a bit more insight into Mike, first name terms, Mike's background. He's the co-founder of a software company called Atlassian. Anyone heard of them? One guy, okay. Listed on NASDAQ, valued at $15 billion US. He himself is worth $1.7 billion US. And that's the guy that's just told you about his feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt and all of that kind of thing. Again, we're trying to build up this community feel, shall we say, of people that kind of feel these things from time to time. Is this going to work? Sorry, Anna, can you just get this back up? Thanks. So trying to bring us back to the Amazon experience, we've already alluded to a number of things, but I would like to think, even if just from the laughs in the room, from the video we've just seen, the idea of acronyms and wikis and being in a meeting, having to scribble something down to wiki it, even within that meeting or look it up later. I myself have done that probably this week. I know lots of other people will have done it, I say, more often than they would probably like to admit. Again, I think this idea of internally saying to yourself, you know what? You shouldn't be here and you know it, and yet you are. You're the person that's been entrusted with running this particular part of a project. Again, I won't dwell on this now, we'll come to it later, but the idea of Amazon being so multifaceted, so many different teams, so many moving parts, you're continually being asked to stretch your understanding and your influence and bring your skills to a new area where there may not be an SOP or an experience that you can imitate exactly. You've got to kind of feel your way. And then finally, how to manage that. So again, the matrix nature of the organization at Amazon, your manager may not have any of the same skills that you have. They may not have any of the same experience that you have. And yet he's the person, she's the person that is there to guide you in how you approach the projects that you're aligned to, that may be totally separate from the ones that they themselves are working on. Again, suddenly this aligns with the video, but feels very close to home, stuff that we have to deal with all the time. And to make this a bit more Amazonian and data-driven, I actually did a mini survey last year where, off the back of learning a bit more about this initiative, this whole imposter syndrome idea, I asked some people within my wider team for a really quick 5-minute help out. So I gave them a list of 8 different feelings or thoughts and asked them to tick the 3 that they'd felt the most strongly within the prior 12 months. Quite an easy exercise, although some did mess it up. That's why the 9 volunteers doesn't add up to the 24 votes, but please forgive them on that one. And again, I won't dwell on this long, but you can see there's 2 that massively stand out as the ones that people had felt most strongly in the previous 12 months. Again, I won't read them, but I'm sure they resonate and they completely chime with what we've discussed with Mike Cannon-Brooks. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. That's, again, a limited pool, but it's data towards people do feel like this. They don't talk about it, but there's more people out there who perhaps feel exactly like you do in given situations.
Cool. So given this is Wi-Fi, we thought we'd put a bit of a gender spin on it. So how does imposter syndrome relate to women in particular? And the first thing to mention is that when these studies were originally done, it was noted that women were more badly affected by imposter syndrome. They were the ones that felt these syndromes of kind of fraudulent intellectual kind of imposterism that we've kind of been talking about so far. As I put in the slides, that's not the case. And actually, a very recent study this year by someone called Cuddy found that it actually affects both genders equally. And actually, what has happened is that when men get feedback about something that they may not have hit the bar on, they react far worse, according to this study, than women do. So it's not just a problem for Wi-Fi. This is just a problem for the world, for society. This is something that is just a confidence thing that needs to be fixed. So while we are talking here on behalf of Wi-Fi, this is definitely something that everyone else can get behind. Okay, so just going to go into slightly more detail about the 5 different types of imposter syndrome that people have talked about. So I'm going to talk in the first person here about the different types of imposter syndrome that you may have. And the first one is a perfectionist, right? So this is the case of I'm holding myself to very, very high goals. And if I don't reach those goals, then it's because I'm rubbish at the job. It's because I can't do it. Maybe I shouldn't even be doing the job. Maybe I shouldn't even be working ever. Maybe I should just go and hide in a hole somewhere. As a perfectionist, maybe I won't meet goals because I'm worried that my deliverables won't be good enough. Thanks, Sophia. Maybe I'm at risk of trying to control too much. If I've got a project or I've got direct employees, maybe I might be accused of micromanaging or delegating or not delegating enough, sorry. And then if I miss that insanely high mark on it, I'm just not cut out for the job. Okay. And the next one is a superwoman man. So this is someone that you may see in Amazon. I'm the kind of person that I'm going to push myself to work harder, work later, and work faster than anyone else. I want to stay later than everyone at the office, and I feel a bit stressed when I'm not working. And I don't feel like I've earned that title, so I feel like I need to work harder than everyone else to kind of prove my own worth. So this is the person that feels like the validation isn't in the results or the kind of the doing the work, but it's actually kind of I need to work so I can feel like I'm doing value, even if the work I'm doing isn't always getting me to the right place. So then there's natural genius, which both Jimmy and I talked about this, and we don't really like this phrase very much, given that we're meant to be kind of vocally self-critical and all of that stuff. We change it to high flyer or overachiever, right? So this is the person, I've had good grades all the way through school and university. I've always been top of my class. I've received award after award, and then suddenly I come somewhere and I don't know everything. And well, it just must be because I'm not good at it. And that's my nature, rather than actually it's okay to learn. So if I'm not learning something quickly, maybe alarm bells are going to start ringing, or maybe I was always told that I was a smart one and that when I can't do something, my confidence just tumbles back. Then got the rugged individualist. So this is when asking for help from someone reveals your phoniness. So it brings out that fact that if I ask someone for help, then I'm going to prove that I'm a fraud to everyone. They're all going to find out that I don't know how to do this. So I'm just not going to ask for help, and I'll just get as far as I can and see what happens. And it's okay to be independent. It's obviously not okay to refuse help to prove your own self-worth. So, and there's also that need to accomplish things on your own and not as part of a team, because you feel like you should be able to do it by yourself. So I feel like my experience, I shouldn't be able to do it. I don't need to rely on the other 3 people in my team. I need to do this for myself because it was given to me. So it's similar to perfectionist, kind of. And then the last one is expert. So this is where I fear being exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable. So I'm going to constantly seek out additional trainings, additional certifications, because I don't feel like I've got those skills. So I need to improve these skills somehow by going to these formal trainings and situations. And then if someone calls me an expert, I'm just step away and say, no, that's not me. Despite the fact that actually the number of trainings and the number of things you've gone to suggests that you probably are. Okay, so question time. Yay, this is the interactive part. So you all have a questionnaire. Yes, you do, all on your, if you wouldn't mind, on the live stream, guys, if anyone is watching, we'll put them up on the slide for you, and just feel free to tick yes or no. If you could just take a couple of questions just to fill in the survey. Don't worry, you don't need to share anything with anyone. It's all completely anonymous. And just see whether any of the results surprise you. So just going to give you kind of a minute to 2 minutes based on that. Okay, thanks. I'm going to do it as well. Okay, how are we doing? Need a bit more time.
Couple more minutes. Yeah. Okay, there's lots of people who look like they're in really deep thought, which is great, but are we about there?
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so you've got what the score means on the back. Again, this is not scientific, right? So this was taken from a psychology website, but obviously, it's a spectrum and there are different questions that relate to different people. But in a minute, we're going to invite you to kind of talk in small groups around kind of what your experience is, whether you're surprised by your results, and kind of go through there. Just out of your own interest, I scored 7. So apparently I experience it more frequently and intensely So that's where I am on the score spectrum. Okay, cool. So just a quick 5-minute discussion because it is interactive, like we said. At the end of the 5 minutes, I'd like your groups of either 3 or 4, wherever you're sat, just kind of turning around, to share one example of imposter syndrome at work. And this isn't one that you've had necessarily. It doesn't have to be. It can be one that you've seen. It can be completely anonymous, or something that surprised you about the questionnaire results, or something that when you've experienced it yourself. But I'd like one example of imposter syndrome that you have seen at work from each group, please, in 5 minutes. Okay.
And I would just add that this is a safe space, although it's being recorded. Please feel free to be as... We're just trying to be playing with you guys. We would encourage... Me and Anne have tried to be as honest and open about how we have... Suffered isn't the right word, but we'll come to that, how we've dealt with these feelings ourselves. We really think this session will be for the better for everybody if people kind of buy into it. So even just the one example, even if you don't have to name names or even give something personal, we'd really appreciate your input on this one.
And actually, we can take stuff off the live broadcast if people really want us to. So, okay, cool. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Oh, 20 minutes.
I went on Do Not Disturb, I thought, and I just closed it.
Yeah.
I closed it, but clearly didn't close it well enough.
No, the leading voices. It's the sailor cover. Insect.
Should I put it back in? Okay, guys, how are we doing? Yep, 5 minutes kind of up.
So,
Awesome. Okay, great. So, wait, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Could I just check if there are any questions from the live broadcast first? No worries. So, if there is anyone on the live broadcast and there is something you want to share, please don't feel that because you're not in the room you cannot share. Everyone in this lovely room would also like to hear your thoughts and experiences. So let's go around the room, and I keep looking over this way because I'm facing that way. So group of 3, is there anything you are willing or open to sharing? Apparently we don't need it, but it's fun to throw, right? So.
Oh.
Oh, in which case, okay.
I think what we discussed is a lot of the times that imposter syndrome is either magnified or amplified depending on the environment you are or the stage you are in the role. So, for instance, if you're in a new role, that's amplified more. And if you're in an environment where people aren't as generous with their time, or you get made to feel like you're a bit of a burden, then you're like all of a sudden you freak out a little bit more, and all the questions kind of amplify themselves a little bit more.
And I think one of the things that they talk about, actually, and contrary to that, is that sometimes the more success you get, the more distinctly you feel that imposter syndrome as well. So whilst it starts when you're new, sometimes if you're unable to harness it and say, actually, no, I think I know what I'm talking about here, sometimes it can actually get worse and worse the higher level you become, because suddenly you're then expected to know everyone else's stuff as well as your own stuff, right? Great. Thanks for sharing. And next group. Trust spread. Perfect.
All right. So, I mean, we had like similar discussions around like the environment. But one of the things we covered was, examples of like consultancy type situation or somebody with like long tenures, where you would actually have at least a perception of people's expectations that you know everything. And so you end up basically fielding just about any questions, and you obviously have no chance to knowing the answers to all those questions, which kind of reinforces that kind of like fraud type image that you may have. The one thing we talked a little bit about was around putting yourself outside of your work environment and doing things like coaching or mentoring, which kind of reinforces the opposite, that you actually know a lot more than you maybe let yourself to believe.
I think so. I'm really glad within the first two answers we've got kind of the two ends of the spectrum. Sorry to play on how long I know you've been at the firm, Fred, but the idea that we've got this comparative transition from new joiner to then expectations on you to know things, but apparently in line with exactly what we're going to discuss later, that doesn't go away with experience, seniority, and everything else you bring, Fred. So yeah, great. Thank you. Next team.
Group.
Sorry, we are going to go around you all because we've got time. So sorry.
I think what we were talking about is how it can be amplified in a place like Amazon. So most people come from a really academic background, top of the class, then you come in here and everyone's the same. So you kind of feel like there's no one you're necessarily better than. That's a really bad way to phrase it, but everyone seems more smart than you and everyone seems like they know what they're doing. So that can be really tough. And then I think we talked about an example where someone can say, what was that, impressionist? The fifth one? No. Anyway, where someone will say, yeah, everything's done. And then when you follow up to be like, is this specific task done? They say, oh, no, that's not done. I didn't know how to do it. So that can be a way of it forming or manifesting itself. And it's also, not a great way to work in general.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is that how everyone always seems so intelligent at Amazon. Yeah. It's one of the best parts of the job in some ways because you can go to work and speak about something completely unrelated to Amazon, realize that they're an expert in a different field, and the call outs that people have are just so so amazing because they do hire good people. You're all super talented, but on the flip side, everyone's so super talented. And it's sometimes kind of a bit overwhelming. When you're sat in a room and you're like, these guys definitely seem to know more than me. And actually it's about kind of taking a step back and saying, actually, what do I know? I do know a lot of stuff. I was hired for a reason. I do have something of value to say.
Maybe you should just come to all meetings with me, Anna.
Yeah. there's a reason I'm presenting this. Hi.
So we talked about combination of lots of these things. So one is the kind of your own kind of doubt in your own ability, and feeling like you're just saying, you're surrounded by smart people, what am I doing here kind of thing. But then there's also that thing about perception, what others, worrying about what others think of you and trying to kind of push past all that and prove that you have the ability. So it's a combination of those two things that cause the syndrome for our group.
Again, I think you touched on it. It's amazing the many different dimensions of answer that we're getting, even from the first four. You touched on the idea of these things kind of changing. It's quite a dynamic thing. Again, that's you're almost stealing our lines from the later slides, but it's brilliant that already people are kind of opening up about the ideas as to how it can actually be a positive thing and how it can be short-term pain, but you can, in the long term, you see that it was actually part of a greater journey where maybe 12 months down the line, you look back and think, wow, I can't believe how much I learned. I mean, even borrowing from my own episodes on this, I know Serena's in the room, who was the first grad that I worked alongside when I first joined FinOps. And she left me after 3 months. It was over. She rotated to a new role, just to clarify. And then I got Anna, so that's timed quite nicely. But with Serena going, I seriously thought, right, how the hell am I going to manage for two people? How am I going to teach Anna, who's incoming? And thankfully, Anna's brilliant and very bright as well. It was, how am I going to teach her when I don't know anything? And then not long after that, to continue it, my boss who'd hired me moved to a new role. So suddenly it's like, I'm the most experienced member of my little team. And I don't know anything, So again, just trying to bring a bit more colour and personal touch to this. We've all got stories like that, I'm sure, but they all kind of come from the same place. And again, I think it's a phenomenon outside of Amazon, but I think the way that we work, and again, we touch on this later, maybe it brings it out in people in Amazon. And one thing we're pleased with and we wanted to encourage is the idea of people being a bit more open about this. So even if you've come and sat with friends, you've probably never talked about things this openly with them, or with strangers, frankly, for that matter. That's part of the first lesson, the first step with all of this. So anyway, enough from me. Can we go to the next group? Thank you.
We got a bit sidetracked talking about me. So I've only been at Amazon for a couple of months. So we talked a lot about my very heavy imposter syndrome. I'm happy to acknowledge that I was way up there IDSs for everything, although some of the things were like maybe. So I was right up there at 9 or 10.
And then we had a group hug. It's great. We're doing team bonding at the same time.
And I got some very positive feedback. So that was really, really good. One thing that I guess that stands out for me is the last question you've got on this slide there, which is, the second last one of you, recognize it in yourself or others. In myself, every minute of every day, and others, never. And I wonder if that's because I perceive myself as being at the sort of extreme end of the spectrum. Therefore, any imposter syndrome anyone has is lower in the spectrum and therefore isn't even on my radar. But if I had imposter syndrome that was perhaps more middle in the spectrum, then I would be able to see other people who had more extreme imposter syndrome. That probably doesn't make any sense.
No, it does.
Any other comments from my budding teammates? No?
So I suppose it's going back to that Venn diagram, right, that Jimmy shared at the beginning. That was brilliant. It was very well articulated. So you've got, the what you think you know in the big circle and the Venn diagram of the opposite, and you may be new to Amazon, but you will have brought other experiences, same as everyone. And it's just a case of, remembering that everyone pretty much has imposter syndrome. I think, when we said the 30% of people that didn't have it, that didn't have the 70% of it, I think they're lying. I can't think of anyone who has ever felt, I just don't think that I'm up to scratch and everyone else knows what they're doing and I don't. I can't think of anyone who will ever have not felt like that. So, it's just a case of just recognizing that others people have it and just knowing what to do about it, right? So why 5 people? Would you like to share something, or are you off the hook? Yeah.
Good.
We should lead by example, right?
I can share an embarrassing story.
Oh, yes, please.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We'll take it out the lives.
So, a few years ago now, when I finished my master's, I wrote my dissertation, and my dissertation won an award. It was Leisure Studies Dissertation of the Year. And as part of that award, I had to go present at the association's conference. And I was terrified. I did not want to go. I'd been at work for about a year. I've been out of academia. All these people were going to ask me questions. I didn't even know. I can't even remember what I wrote. It was like a very extreme few weeks, and it went out my head, and I was thinking about, I don't know, payroll, I think now. So I went to the event. My boyfriend forced me to go. I spent hours preparing, and I went down there, and I spent the whole conference. I was on in the afternoon, complete mistake, and I spent the whole day feeling sick and worried. And at one point, I went to the toilet to practice because I thought I could speak and hear my echoey voice. And actually went and got someone to find me because I thought I'd run out the building. So it finally came, the horrible time. And it was a choice between myself and the other one. There was two. And unfortunately, mine was more popular, which made it even worse. I was hoping no one would come. So I stood there and I was talking, and I was shaking like a leaf. And I had this out-of-body experience. And I realised it was going awfully. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was stumbling over my words. And all these people were just nodding and smiling. And I was thinking, these people are stupid. How on earth do they think I'm talking sense? And then actually that moment gave me so much confidence, because it was like being at the worst possible moment of awfulness in your life. That actually, if this is as bad as giving a presentation can get, it's not actually that bad. If I can trick all these people into thinking I know what I'm talking about, brilliant. So it actually recovered and got a lot better. And now I'm not afraid of doing presentations or sharing embarrassing stories in front of everybody. So I suppose there's a silver lining to that story.
That's such a good story.
I mean, just wow. Okay. Wow. Again, again, it's amazing how accidentally, without you guys seeing the slides, you've stumbled on many different things that we touch on now in terms of actually it's okay to suffer. And again, suffer, for want of a better word, it's not the negative. It comes with a negative connotation, being a syndrome. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that. I mean, we may not all have an out-of-body experience that shows us how well it's going, but the idea that actually work with it, don't work against it, turn it for a force for good, kind of slides us nicely to what we're going to talk about now.
So literally just before we go into kind of the main thing, we found a quote from Emma Watson, and I love her, so I just thought we would share, a good icon and that she is also experiencing. So we've got to add to the list, we've got Meryl Streep, we've got Albert Einstein, we've got the other gut person who I don't know who that is.
Sheryl Sandberg.
Yeah. That person, and Emma Watson. So, we're all adding ourselves to this list of amazing people.
So yeah, again, we're in good company. Hope that reassures you. So, yeah, like I just touched on, we're going to go back to another clip from Mike, my mate Mike, telling us about, again, the idea of having imposter syndrome is okay. So he's talking about this idea that he himself recognised it. Again, I'm really grateful again for the honesty and the openness that we've fostered in the room about our own experiences. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to him. Sorry, thanks.
We were about 4 years old, and we had about 70 employees. And at the advice of our auditors, most good stories start with advice from an auditor, we entered the New South Wales Entrepreneur of the Year competition. Now, we were surprised when we won the New South Wales Entrepreneur of the Year in the young category for entrepreneurs under 40. There were 8 categories. And so surprised, in fact, having looked at the list of people we were up against, I didn't even turn up to the award ceremony. So Scott collected the gong by himself. And then we travelled off to the national awards. I thought I should probably turn up to those. So we rented some suits. I invited a girl that I had just met. We'll get to her in a second. And off we went to the big black tie gala. Now, our surprise turned to shock in the first award of the night, the young category, when we beat all of the other states and won the Australian Young Entrepreneur of the Year. And when the shock wore off, we got a lot of champagne to the table and the party began, and the night was surely over. We were having a royally great time. So fast forward to the last award of the night, and our shock turned into everybody's shock when we won the Australian Entrepreneur of the Year against all of the other categories. Now, so shocked was everybody else, in fact, that the announcer, the CEO of Ernst & Young, opened the envelope, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Oh my God." And then he reset himself and announced that we had won. So we knew we were in way too deep. And from there, the water got a lot deeper, because we jetted off to Monte Carlo to represent Australia in the World Entrepreneur of the Year against 40 other different countries. Now, in another rented suit, I was at one of the dinners and sitting next to a lovely man called Belmiro de Azevedo, who was the winner from Portugal. Total champion. At 65, he had been running his business for 40 years. He had 30,000 employees. Don't forget, at the time, we had 70. And he had €4 billion in turnover. And after a couple of wines, I remember admitting to him that I felt that we did not deserve to be there, that we were well out of our depth, and that at some time someone was going to figure this out and send us home to Australia. And he, I remember, just paused and looked at me and said that he felt exactly the same way, and that he suspected all the winners were feeling that way, and that despite not knowing Scott or I or really anything about technology, he said that we were obviously doing something right and should probably just keep going. Now, this was a pretty big light bulb moment for me for two reasons. One, I realized that other people felt this as well. And two, I realized it doesn't go away with any form of success. I had assumed that successful people didn't feel like frauds. And I now know that the opposite is more likely to be true.
So just stopping the clip there again, we could play the whole clip, but we wanted to try and splice it up nicely to fit with what we're discussing again with the group. And he's just said it there, but for me, the idea, again, the guy, given the stature, given the business that he owns and the modesty that he clearly shows, the idea that he had this light bulb moment when meeting another, I guess now fellow billionaire, talking about two things that he took away from the conversation. One being that, firstly, other people felt like that. And again, I'd like to think the open conversation we've had, people should leave here feeling assured that there's plenty of other people within Amazon and beyond that feel this way. And then secondly, almost the quite poetic idea that it doesn't go away with success. Now, it's almost quite cruel, frankly, that as you progress, get promoted, take on new projects, they go well, this actually makes this feeling worse rather than actually aiding it. So it's almost a very cruel twist of fate, that the more successful you are, the more of a fraud you feel if you say, just take this at face value without trying to recognise that it's okay to have it. It's okay to have these questions, these nagging doubts with yourself. Which brings us to... sorry. Okay, so there's accepting that it's okay, and again, that's something you can do within yourself, but then reframing this to take positives from imposter syndrome. And again, we've tried to keep this within an Amazon framing. The idea that, again, this isn't a syndrome. This is something that you can use to be very positive. And the things that it immediately shows about you as positives are intellectual humility. Again, that's something that I found from my own personal experience at Amazon. There aren't too many people walking around that tell you how good they are. That's not really the culture here. People tend to be more on the modest side, if anything. They don't need to tell you how good they are. The results speak for themselves. Again, I think that's a very good trait to have. Approaching situations as an amateur, again, be curious, newcomer. Again, the amount of different businesses, locations, new projects that are launched, at some stage you're going to be the newcomer to a project, no matter your experience. Again, going back to what you said earlier, Fred. The idea that is healthy, that you're going to challenge the most basic assumptions that, if found out later, could have blown the whole project over. Within that, it's okay to not know an answer. Again, the amount of MBRs that I've been in, for example, where people have been comfortable taking on the idea that they don't know the answer to the director that's answering them, but they've then gone and found it out and they've responded quickly. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a very great way to approach the way you go about reporting in your area. And finally, the push to action. So slightly different from the previous point. This is the idea of get busy doing. As cliched in Hollywood as that sounds, if you get busy doing something and stop worrying and self-doubting, it means suddenly a month, 2 months, 3 months down the line, when you've achieved and learned that much more, you suddenly realize, okay, well, because I was snowed, because I really dived deep into this, the chance to actually doubt myself came and went. I'd forgotten about it. So again, as obvious as it sounds, just get busy doing it.
And I was just going to quickly share an experience that I had a few weeks ago as I was preparing for this. I sat in on a business partner talking with another team while I'd been away, and the questions that they had asked, for the knowledge that that person has, they have been on Amazon for a long time, they know a lot about the business, and yet the questions they asked started right from the beginning. So they understood every single point until to the end. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because I was thinking this person should know everything. And yet at this point in time, they are completely comfortable admitting that they don't. And they are completely comfortable pushing and pushing and pushing to get the answers that make sense to them before they get that clarity. And that made me step back and think, okay, I'm going to start asking more questions when I don't understand.
Cool. And we're going to come to a final clip now, which goes with that idea of, again, Amazonian bias for action, the idea of just keeping going. Again, it's our man Mike. Sorry.
Where's the mouse gone? Oh my God, I've lost the mouse. Okay, literally, there we go, found it.
Now, feeling like, or people thinking I'm someone I'm not, actually happens quite frequently. A great example from my more recent past, a few months ago, I was up late at night with one of my kids, and I saw something on Twitter about Tesla saying that they could solve South Australia's rolling series of power crises with one of their large industrial batteries. Now, without thinking, I fired off a bunch of tweets challenging them and saying, were they really serious about this? And in doing so, I managed to kick a kind of a very small rock off a very big hill that turned into an avalanche that I found myself tumbling in the middle of. Because you see, a few hours later, Elon tweeted me back and said that they were deadly serious. That within 100 days of contract signing, they could install a 100 megawatt hour facility, which is a giant battery on a world-class size, one of the biggest ever made in the planet. And that's when all hell really broke loose. Within 24 hours, I had every major media outlet texting and emailing and trying to get in contact with me to get opinion as some sort of expert in energy. Now, at the time, I couldn't really have told you the difference between a 1.5 volt AA battery that goes in my kids' toys and a 100 megawatt hour industrial scale battery facility that goes in South Australia that could potentially solve their power crisis. So I was now feeling a chronic case of imposter syndrome, and it got truly bizarre. And I remember thinking to myself, shit, I've kind of started something here, and I can't really get out. If I abandon the situation, I'm going to sort of set back renewables in Australia and maybe just look like a complete idiot because of my idiocy on Twitter. So I thought the only thing I could do was to try not to freeze and to try to learn. So I spent a week trying to learn everything I could about industrial scale batteries and the electricity grid and renewables and the economics of all this and whether this was even a feasible proposal. I talked to the chief scientist, I talked to the CSIRO, had multiple ministers and premiers trying to give me their side of the story from both sides of the aisle. Managed to exchange tweets with the Prime Minister, even managed to pull off a passing impression, let's say, of an energy expert on ABC Lateline. But as a result of all this, South Australia did put out a battery tender, and they had more than 90 applications for that battery tender. And the national conversation over a period of a few months moved from these sort of theatrical lumps of coal in the Parliament to discussing kind of which industrial scale battery chemistry was the best for building large-scale renewable batteries. So I think that the important lesson is by that time in my life, I knew well that I was an imposter. I knew I was miles out of my depth. But instead of freezing, I tried to learn as much as I could, motivated by my fear of generally looking like an idiot, and tried to turn that into some sort of a force for good. So one of the things I've learned is that people think that successful people don't feel like frauds. But I think, especially knowing a lot of entrepreneurs, the opposite is more likely to be true. But the most successful people I know don't question themselves, but they do regularly question their ideas and their knowledge, right? They know when the water is way too deep, and they're not afraid to ask for advice. They don't see that as a bad thing. And they use that advice to hone those ideas, to improve them, and to learn. And it's
Okay, so again, I'm sure you'd agree, brilliant insight into the workings of this guy's mind and his kind of coming to terms with the idea, as he said, that he is an imposter. And again, part of the therapy, if you want to call it that, after recognising, is learning to admit that that's okay. I'd like to think we all stood up. We might all, if honestly, say we are imposters. We feel like this. Even if it's based on questionable evidence, shall we say, and it may be self-fabricated, we've all said we're imposters to a certain extent. And as we mentioned in the clip, the idea of that being a bad thing is kind of washed away. The idea that the most successful people are very comfortable not knowing things and having expectations that they will find out thrown on them, knowing that they will still approach in a pragmatic way, getting to the bottom of the issues that will be in any project that they are thrown at. Again, speaking from experience at Amazon and knowing experience of other people even within this room, again, that's really reassuring. You might get the call one day to work on something in a whole new area that you've got no experience of, but your approach, your pragmatism, your skills that you clearly may not value are what is needed in that role. Again, really, really reassuring.
Okay, so the last thing that you guys are probably looking for is, right, well, we know that it's a thing. We know that some of us experience it, but what do we actually do now that we know? So just a couple of tips, and again, we are not experts. However, I think that's a bit of imposter syndrome coming through. We have done a bit of research on this. And just a couple of ideas that we came up with and a few articles that said what to do. And the first one is obviously using an Amazonian leadership principle, learn and be curious. So going back to that example that we had, and so asking questions, and if you don't know, go and find out. And if you don't know at the time, ask those questions until you do, based on the audience, of course. And it will really enrich that conversation, right? So saying, hold on, I'm not sure I quite understand that. Chances are there's going to be someone else in the room that doesn't as well. So it's just going to help the overall understanding and create those questions that might actually go that step deeper, that might actually take you to the crux of the matter and not just skimming over the surface and, yeah, I think that methodology makes sense to me, I'm approving it. That's not what we want to do as finance. We want to get to the actual depths. Encouraging that open discussion. So in meetings and conversations you're having, you can help influence thought. You can create bias for good and bad habit building. So let's make it good habit building, and trying to make sure that you can have that open discussion and say, okay, is this the right thing that we're doing? Am I doing the wrong thing? Where are we? Give each other reassurance, right? So it's just really important. I feel like in this room, we've given each other quite a lot of reassurance in what's happening, and making each other feel that actually, even if we do feel it, pretty much for the most part, we're doing a good job. If you're not doing a good job at Amazon, someone will tell you. And so the fact that if no one has told you you're doing a bad job, you should be assured that actually things are probably going to be pretty good for you. And the next one is teach. So it creates that pressure that you have to be aware of what's going on. You have to know your stuff. So standing in front of you guys teaching Imposter Syndrome, when we first started, Jimmy and I were having a bit of a conversation. I was like, I don't really know anything about this though. Like, I don't really know if I can. I just read an article about it. And Jimmy was like, well, but you've read an article and you've done, and then I did some more studying and, read a couple of studies and things. And by that point, it's like, oh, actually, no, we do know about imposter syndrome. So am I suffering it from giving this presentation? Yes, I was, definitely, until we had this conversation and realized how ridiculous that was. But teaching others, training others, mentoring others reminds you that you do know stuff. And actually, you are more knowledgeable than you may think. Asking for feedback in the same way as encouraging that open discussion from your mentors, from your peers, from your managers, from anyone that you can get your hands on. So you know actually where you are. If you think, I really can't do this part of my job, I don't think I'm doing a good job, I think I'm an imposter, someone's going to find out if that is the case. And if it's the case, great, this is how we can improve. If not, you're doing a great job and there wasn't any need to worry, and it will just take the load off. How do you take the next steps from there? And don't do yourself a disservice. That's the last one I think I would say. Everyone in this room admitted that sometimes they felt like this. And it's just a case of sometimes sitting yourself down and having a think with yourself and saying, actually, I'm here for a reason and I need to have this confidence. So just going to go super quickly because you haven't got that much time about the 5 types. What can you do? If I'm a perfectionist, be okay that things aren't perfect 100% of the time. Be okay submitting projects and knowing that there are going to be points where things aren't working. This is Amazon, right? Nothing is ever perfect. There's always little band-aid patches and things. And so we need to be okay with that. If you're a superwoman, start training yourself to veer away from that external validation, or man, apologies, Wi-Fi. So no one should ever have power to make you feel good about your work other than you. Even your boss, if they give you a project to stamp approval, great, but make sure that you're taking that validation yourself. If you're enjoying your work, great, but don't just work long hours because you feel like you should be. Natural genius, try seeing yourself as a work in progress. Right, so it's rather than beating yourself up when you don't reach those standards, try and identify these specific changeable behaviors that you can improve over time. Rugged individualists, I put here, no one is an island, which I think is really cheesy, but I think that's kind of it. We will all depend on people. We work in a team. It's a case of asking for help from others and being aware that actually it is okay to ask for help. It doesn't need to be personal help in terms of, I can't do this, can you help me? But hey, this project, I'm not quite sure where the next step is, or can you help me out with this particular facet because you're an expert in this? And then the expert one, start practicing just-in-time learning. Learn your stuff as you need it, rather than going on trainings in case at some point you might need to know how to use Excel VBA. I haven't used it. I haven't been trained in it. For a good few years, I thought that I should go to the training. I haven't needed it. So until I have to use it, I'm not going to go. And we're just going to leave you with a few wise words of wisdom from a couple more people we can add to the list of those who we are in company of. So with that, are there any questions? I went too quickly. I'll leave you back to it. With that, are there any questions? Thank you for your time. No questions.
Let them read.
I don't want to let them read. I just want to... Okay. Cool. So thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all found it useful. and hopefully a bit inspiring to realise that, you know, everyone does have a slight sufferance of this, and it's actually okay to use it to your benefit. Okay, thanks very much, guys.